being
Garbage.
fudged because apparently working at Bloomberg is really hard, and you can't actually fact check any of the numbers that you put in your article.
Man, like
It's
people
too
tell us
hard.
not to trust ChatGPT, and then they go and they throw in fake numbers with human writers anyway.
And then
Well, it's just like-
ChatGPT is trained on all of it, so
And just like clearly fake numbers too. Like just it's not even like
They're not even trying.
yeah, it's just like to get 10 cajillion billion CO2 tons of pollution. It's like, man, maybe you should fact check that because that sounds wrong. Nope. Well, I guess it was like that. I can't even remember. It was some congressional hearing, and one of the Congress people asks the committee members how much of the atmosphere that they think is made up of CO2.
Yeah.
The mean answer, like all of them guessed between like 3 and 10% of the atmosphere. It's like
I don't even know off the top of my head.
It's something like I can't remember exactly,
Like
but it's like
0.3 or something.
0.02 or point. It's like point. Atmosphere. There we go. Google completing 0.04%.
Yeah, there you go.
So they're off by about a magnitude of 100.
I mean, obviously the people aren't paying attention to that, but I feel like you could use that defense if you thought it was like 4% to say that CO2 emissions don't matter because it's such a small fraction. And then you're like, shit.
Well, it's just like if you're on the climate change committee for Congress, shouldn't you know?
yeah, I feel like that would be a fact you would like to have on hand, or at least in your notes, and you can just say, hold on 1 second, I can check. To make sure that I have the proper number.
Government. I expect them not to know, given the fact that they're on the committee.
They intentionally avoid information.
Yeah, like
No, don't tell me. I don't want to bias myself.
man, if they knew too much, like they'd never get on the committee because then that would be a problem.
True. They just pick the dumbest ones with the least scientific understanding.
It's like, have you ever, for instance, firearms committees, have you ever handled a firearm? No. Do you know anybody who's handled a firearm? No. Okay, you're perfect.
It's like jury selection.
Yeah. All right.
Are you a lawyer?
And with that fun preamble, we're live. So today we're going to be talking about the wonderful world of fast fashion. It's something that seems to, at least from our research, kind of come and go into the public consciousness, but never stay for long. And thought that was rather interesting, so we wanted to take a look at it. And I think first we can just start off with like some interesting stats about the fashion, like textile industry as it's progressed over the last 30 years or so. I'm just looking at some stats in terms of like tonnage and dollars as to see what the growth levels are. And Hubbards, do you have any of those on hand? Or do you not know? Like a good committee member.
A little bit. So the one I saw was, I mean, like you said, it does come in and out of studies, so the time frames are a little bit like inconsistent. But the one like I saw was that clothing purchases increased 60% between the year 2000 and the year 2014, but people kept them half as long. So that was like 60% growth in 40 years or 14 years. Pretty crazy.
I had another stat, similar time frame, 2000 2015, that said that clothing production doubled. So given those two stats, if you assume they're both true, it would mean that a lot of clothes were getting landfilled because they weren't selling as well, which is another interesting phenomenon that goes on.
Well, yeah, I did actually find in like rough estimate, it seems like the rough estimate, there doesn't seem to be like perfect data, is about 10% of all clothes just get sent directly to the dump or like landfill or incinerated prior to being sold, just like excess inventory. So it's like fairly substantial amount, 10%.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, especially when you're talking like jacking up the clothing production by 100%, and then you're still tossing 10% of it.
Yeah, what I saw for stats was in Europe, from 2000 to about 2020, there's a 100% increase in tonnage sold, and it's expected to rise another 60% by 2030. So from like 2020-ish to 2030 is another 60% increase, which obviously the population is not going to increase that rapidly.
It's actually going to be decreasing.
Yeah, it's probably going to be going down
yeah.
at that point. So, like, you know, if that trend actually comes true, it's pretty ludicrous.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just like correspondingly to the significant increase in the amount of clothing sold. Obviously, not obviously, but intuitively there has been a decline in the number of times people wear clothes before they get rid of them, and that's been pretty consistent across the world. In terms of the total world amount has declined quite a bit, and the U.S. declined. I guess the one that declined like markedly more than a lot of the other ones is China.
That's what I saw as well.
China went from, like, I'm just looking at one point of research, but from 2002 to 2016, they went from over 200 times per garment being worn before thrown out to closing in on 50 times.
Mm-hmm.
And the US is at around 40. So, like, China went from, and the US started in 2002, that around like 45 maybe. So the US declined a bit, but China like declined a crazy amount.
And it seems to be pretty in keeping with their economic growth, because I think it was 2017, I believe, when China hit purchasing power parity with the United States. Or 2018. Is that even right? No. Okay, I think I have that confused. But the point being that their economy is just growing insanely, and the amount they wear clothes has gone down insanely.
Yeah, the amount they keep their clothes is just falling. Yeah.
No, they just stopped wearing them, actually.
Yeah,
they're down to one garment per person.
Throw them in the closet and leave them there. It's their investments.
Yeah, little known fact, it's real estate and clothing.
So, I just think that's pretty interesting that China was one of the leaders in terms of just, and obviously given how big China is, that's going to drive world trends to a degree.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing on the Chinese textile front is that what I was reading was in the early 2000s, well, up until the early 2000s, there was a pretty good industry in India making shoddy, which I'm almost certain is where the term shoddy craftsmanship and such comes from, because it's an old word for recycled wool made into a new material called shoddy. And they would make blankets out of this for disaster relief out of recycled wool. And the manufacturing and textiles in China became so efficient that a brand new polar fleece blanket would be American $2.50, whereas a shoddy blanket would be American $2. So they just completely scooped the market on disaster relief blankets, and so there was no market for these shoddy blankets anymore. And that entire industry is basically shut down for the most part in India now, and those textile manufacturers have all switched to making new product with newer, more industrial textile machines from China.
Well, that brings up another interesting trend that's kind of gone along in that same time frame, which is like a increasing reliance on polyester fibers for clothing, which basically, oil-derived plastic fibers, which they're cheaper and easier to use a lot of the time than traditional fibers like cotton. So they're definitely, especially for like mass-produced stuff, definitely can be preferred.
And they have that smooth feel, and they're cheap too, which is another thing. Like if you have wool or linen, like traditional, or cotton's smooth, but not as light. Like I actually don't have anything silk, but I'd imagine like silk is similarly smooth, but a million times more expensive.
Yeah, and you obviously can do blends and stuff, so you have a lot of blended products that have cotton polyester blends and whatnot to like get the right feel and cost and all that type of thing. And I guess the one interesting thing there is it seems that polyester is less water intensive at the very least compared to like cotton growing. So that's like
That makes sense. Cotton growing, from what I've read of the industry, is usually done in areas that are quite arid, so it requires an immense amount of irrigation.
yeah, and it's pretty insane how much water is used for cotton textiles. I think it's like the second most water intense industry in the world.
Well, as a side note, there, if anyone's ever heard of, I can't remember the name of the lake now, but I think it was the Aral Sea in the USSR, and they wanted to turn Kazakhstan into the cotton center of the world. So they started irrigating from the Aral Sea, which is an inland sea, to the cotton fields of Kazakhstan. And their irrigation basically drained the Aral Sea past the point of no return, and it has been slowly evaporating ever since. So permanent, world-changing geographical implications from cotton farming.
Yeah, so polyester doesn't have, I think, the water intensity, but obviously because it's using oil as primary input, it's very energy intense and CO2 intense. So that has been, I mean, cited as a growing problem. And the other, I think, I would say, in my personal opinion, the more important issue with polyesters is the microplastics that they shed.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, looking at the microplastic numbers from textiles is pretty crazy. 35% of microplastics in the world's oceans are from textile fibers, and 70% of microplastics in U.S. river water was estimated to come from textiles. Which, yeah, that's all going to be your polyesters shedding basically and it's pretty easy to see why they would, because you're washing them repeatedly and they
Yeah.
are not going to maintain their integrity wash after wash after wash, and that's like right into the water supply, obviously. So there's not really any good fix there as far as I can think of. Like, there's just really no way you're ever going to keep water plastics or microplastics out of the water if you're using polyester clothes.
And I think there's kind of an intuitive understanding that microplastics aren't good, but it hasn't been well demonstrated in many cases as to exactly why microplastics aren't good. But one demonstration that I did see was a study on dust found in homes. And it wasn't a huge study. It was just on 10 apartments in the same building, each with a single male inhabitant, to try and, minimize your variables. But they found a correlation between the amount of polyester and nylon microplastics in the dust and the amount of bacterial cultures that contain antibiotic resistant genes. So they aren't certain whether antibiotic resistant genes are promoted by microbes growing on plastics, or if the microbes that can grow on plastics just happen to develop more antibiotic genes. But they find that in the ocean as well. So it's a clear demonstration of one of the negatives of microplastics is fostering these antibiotic resistant bacterial cultures.
Yeah, so I guess, yeah, either way you slice it is not great. I think, just going back to the rise in clothing consumption, one of the reasons, obviously, that clothing consumption has continued to grow and grow and grow is cost. If you look at, this is using kind of American reference points, but I think it was again over the 2000 to 2014 period that I was talking about earlier. No, sorry, this was the last 20 years, I guess. The CPI, which is like a measure of price.
Consumer price index, right?
Yeah, exactly. The general CPI increased 63.5% in this 20-year period, while clothing had gone down 3.3%. And it's a lot of fancy, well, not really that fancy, but there's some small amount of math involved. But economists will use time measure cost, so they'll take wages to normalize it. So they'll say, how many hours will it take you to buy the same amount of X product. And using that measure, clothing has fallen 47.5% over the last 20-year period in terms of real cost to a consumer. So you can buy basically almost twice as much clothing for the same amount of dollars now than you could 20 years ago, which then, not surprisingly, people are buying a lot more clothes. They're a lot cheaper.
Well, I hear stories of Americans yeah, my dad does motorbike trips, and American motorcyclists will often just buy new clothes on the road rather than pack clothes with them. Because what's the point when a t-shirt's $3? Just throw the other one in the Sally Ann bin. Or what do the Americans have? They probably have a Salvation Army too.
Yeah, and like at a certain point, for certain clothing items, it's actually just cheaper to buy new ones than wash them. like certain like suits and stuff, like it's just easier to buy a new suit jacket for whatever $30 than it is to dry clean your old one.
True.
Like
if you're in that sort of have to wear suit, but it doesn't have to be nice tier.
Yeah, and it's like
It's a rough tier to be in, though.
Well, it could be rougher. You could have to buy a $200 one. Thankfully, you can find them for $30.
Yeah, that was like the Depression. You see all the soup kitchens, and everyone's lined up in their great coats and their sport jackets and their bowlers, and they're getting handouts. Tough times.
I think, yeah. I was quoting American numbers, but it is interesting that it seems like clothing consumption is going up everywhere. And again, I go ahead.
I was going to say an interesting thing with the clothing consumption going up is because we talked about China, which I think everyone could intuitively understand because they are an incredibly quickly developing economy. But even in the third world countries, there's been a move towards more new clothing because it's getting so cheap. Although there's kind of a balancing between the clothing's getting cheaper, but also these countries want to grow their own domestic textile industries. So what was happening in the early 2000s was that a lot of old clothes were getting exported to these third world countries and then being resold there to be used secondhand. And in many cases, it would be that sort of garbage that's now produced of like the 10% would just be shipped over for dirt cheap. So there's some really good old photos of the old school fast fashion industry where you'd get like the Super Bowl champions, but it would be the wrong team that won because
those are always funny videos or pictures.
They built all the merchandise to sell, and then the team that didn't win, all their merchandise got shipped to like Uganda or Kenya or somewhere. But now they all want to both build their domestic industries, and the cost of clothing has gone down. So they're actually decreasing their amount of imported secondhand clothing at the same time that the Western world is increasing how much clothing it throws out or like would have previously went into the secondhand market, such that the demand for that used clothing is going down right when the amount of used clothing is skyrocketing. Well, according to the data I have, it's actually flat, but that's only up to 2016. I imagine it's gone up.
Which, I mean, brings a point to like what happens with old clothes, which doesn't seem to be great information. It doesn't really seem to be much effort put into researching exactly what happens to old clothes, but the best estimates seem to show that 87% of clothing ends up either incinerated or in landfills, which the numbers I saw said about 70% of that. 70% is landfills, and then 17% would be incinerated, and the 13% is like sent to quote unquote recycling. But then when you kind of dig into it deeper, it seems like the stuff that is put in for recycling and whatnot, much of that just winds up eventually in landfills or incineration or whatever. Like it doesn't actually get recycled. And
I have a good example of that. Like, so Chile is one of the cities in Chile. I cannot pronounce it for the life of me, but it's right on the coast. And they get shipped quite a bit of tonnage of old clothes from mostly the United States, Canada, but also Mexico. And what there's like they're supposed to be taking it in for recycling, and then they say at least half of it's thrown into this like huge dump in the desert where it's just like left to disintegrate. But because it is, most of them are like at least a polyester blend, it's a couple hundred years plus for it to fully disintegrate, which of course then turns into the microplastics getting into all the waterways. It is in the desert, so that's a little bit like less of a problem, but it's still pretty
The
bad.
beauty of those being in the desert, though, is that due to the fact they're microplastics and they're degrading in the
Into the sand.
environment, is that eventually the sun will cause them to light on fire spontaneously.
Well,
And you'll
what they
have
do in the dump
garbage
is they just
burning through
start
the
burning
dumps.
them. Like they just take into torching like an annual torch of the big piles of clothes, and you know it's obviously like pretty toxic smoke that then wafts over the area. They have laws on the books to prevent it, but they have a lot of illegal dumps, and it seems like a decent number of the clothing waste is just going to wind up like instead of being recycled. They say 50%, but you know it's probably like given that it's chilly and the data is not always the most reliable. It's hard to know exactly, but it's probably a lot closer to like 70 or 80% that just winds up in these dumps and burned instead of being recycled. Because like you're saying, it's polyester. It's very difficult to recycle that.
Yeah, well, and the blends, right? Like, so it seems like the chemical processes that it takes to like break down the polyesters and actually make them into something recoverable is difficult, and it actually takes fairly sophisticated facilities and training for personnel. And it's like a lot of the places that are taking these clothes in are just not going to have the infrastructure and whatnot to actually get anything meaningful out of the clothing in terms of recycled fibers.
The stat I saw for recycling was specifically in Britain, and it was from the BBC, and they said 10 to 20% of donated clothes are actually sold in charity shops, which, depending on, like, that's usually the best way to consider something recycled is if it just goes back out. And then the other, obviously, 90 to 90% goes into one of these systems and then eventually ends up probably being landfilled or burned.
But eventually use clothes, right? Make their way.
Yeah.
It extends the life, right? But obviously it does. It's like the end result is it's gonna eventually get so worn out that it's gonna get thrown out, right? And completely. And like you said, the end state of so much of the clothes is just burnt or landfilled. Like it's so hard to recover the fibers.
Well, I know I had read in the past about power plants that would run on, well, basically garbage power plants, but at the end of a season for textile manufacturing, the garbage that those garbage power plants would run on would just be clothes for a month.
Well, there was a news story in 2017 about a Swedish coal plant that bought a bunch of, I think, jeans. Was running there.
No,
Coal
that's
plant
just actually the way to do it.
Jeans for a while.
Free power.
Why not?
Yeah, instead of going to a landfill in the middle of the desert.
I mean, probably the most effective.
Well, Germans gonna have to figure it out.
I was thinking about this, and my assumption, which is entirely unfounded, other than the fact that people don't do it more often, is that it must be difficult to scrub the toxins out of burned clothing, because otherwise it would be used as an alternative fuel more often than it is, I think. But there's got to be some sort of difficulty logically.
Well, probably dyes and stuff like that, right? And like there's a lot of different things added that's not gonna be like just pure fiber material.
Yeah, like when you're in the burning for energy industry, it's ridiculous how many scrubbers have to be put in place to remove pollution and particulates out of, say, natural gas, let alone coal, and then let alone
Jeans.
polyester. Yeah, denim.
Yeah, I don't know. It's probably not that straightforward. Otherwise, you'd hear it a lot more, given the glut.
Yeah, because people will give it away for free. Like they just want to get rid of it.
Well, yeah, they're probably a lot of these companies that, because again, a lot of it is companies that basically they're trying to catch the trend, so they overproduce, and then it doesn't pan out, and then they're probably paying to get rid of it, honestly.
I think that's the latest, greatest transition there will be into trends because of smartphones. The fast fashion has now evolved into what the people on the journalists on the ground, millennial journalists who don't get these zooms, are calling the ultra fast fashion. And they're saying that a company like Zara that sort of revolutionized fast fashion by putting out 5-6 times as many articles of clothing in a year as their competitors. There's now a company out of China called Shein is the big one. And it puts out 5 to 6 times as many articles of clothing as Zara does. It can have 1,000 new articles of clothing on its website in a day.
Well, I did see an interesting argument about like Shein.
That's how they said it was pronounced. You'd think it's pronounced Shein, but apparently because it's Chinese, it's Shein.
But so the argument basically goes that Shein will do like small runs of clothes, and then they'll post them on their website, and then they'll only do like big extended runs of clothes of things that sell well on their website. And they say that they're actually more environmentally friendly than something like an H&M, that because H&M will kind of relies on a more traditional model where they try to predict the kind of fashion trends, and then they'll do big runs of things that they think will sell well. And if they miss the mark, then they're kind of shit out of luck, and they have a big glut of inventory that they just can't sell. Whereas Shein will never do that because they only do little small sample runs. They'll put it on the site, and if it starts selling like crazy, then they'll do bigger runs and sell out of it because it's a high demand product, and they know that because it's all online, and they have the info on the demand right at their fingertips.
And they're so streamlined. It sounds like, I believe the number is 1 week in terms of turnaround for when they make a decision to when it can actually be being produced. Whereas Zara, which was like the one to beat before that, was looking at more like a month in terms of their turnaround on developing a new garment and then getting it out there. The interesting thing with Shein is that the environmental argument is maybe in their favor, but they're definitely bringing back the trend of getting upset about clothing companies using sweatshops because they have a bunch of basically subcontractors in China that sit around doing nothing if Shein doesn't need them to do anything, but they aren't Shein employees, so they aren't treated as well as they should be as Chinese workers, which, I mean, that's a pretty low bar, but like even in China, it's a bad place to. They're not legally working for Shein, but all their work comes from Shein when Shein is busy and needs them to make things. It's just very exploitative. And it's the first time, well, actually it's not the first time because there's also some interesting company that makes stuff in the UK that uses illegal labor.
Yeah, so I was looking at that. That's the Pretty Little Thing. And they do the same thing where they just hire people off the street.
Owns Pretty Little Thing.
What's that?
Well, it was like Boohoo that then one of their brands was Pretty Little Thing. Boohoo is the parent company, I believe.
Yes. Actually, it might be a different. I think Boohoo might even be different. I'd have to double check, but I know Pretty Little Thing was like the main facing brand, like public facing brand label, and they do much the same thing where they just have contractors. They hire out at half the minimum wage. And then they have the same model, right, where it's like a quick run, or like a really quick turnaround. So if they need to, like if they're getting good demand, the people will have work. But then if it just cuts out for the day because nobody's buying anything more, then they just send everybody home with no compensation.
Yeah, so mostly to say that this isn't a Chinese exclusive problem.
Yeah, this is happening mostly in Leicester in the UK. That's where they've put these. They're basically like there was a undercover journalist who went into it, and it doesn't seem like atrocious working habits in this or working conditions where they're incredibly unsafe and unsanitary or anything like that. But it certainly isn't pleasant, and
Well,
It is,
up to 14 hours a day sewing is a terrible working condition for
yeah, like
sure.
that in and of itself is pretty horrible.
Man, they're
But
just
the
they're
low pay
just
is,
they're just like going back to their heritage, the Industrial Revolution.
yeah,
They're just
exactly.
living out their British heritage. Like
And they're
this,
even using Indians for it.
it's not even a freaking coal mine. It's not even that bad. Like, come on, guys. Like, it's a textile mill. It's not that bad.
Yeah, call me when they bring back chimney sweeps.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you don't even have to like bend down and like crawl into a mine. Like, you just
And have it
walk in the
collapse
front
on you.
door. I'm sure like they don't lock the door like they used to in the early 1900s when they would just lock the factories up.
But yeah, so that other clothing company, that Pretty Little Thing, and whoever they're owned by, I believe would also qualify as the ultra fast fashion because I think they said their turnaround was 2 weeks.
It's a week.
So it is interesting. It's okay.
They can get it.
they-
Yeah, the guy that was running the location said that he can get it done in a week.
So the interesting thing is that this ultra fast fashion segment has sort of brought back into the limelight, at least in the last year, the mistreatment of textile workers in the industry.
I mean, I can't. Yeah, like I can't imagine that any of the places that do textiles like heavy, like Bangladesh, have good working conditions either.
Yeah,
Like,
but
so
it kind of seemed like that was on the back burner during the fast fashion stuff, and it was all about climate change, and then that kind of now the people have once again realized that these are terribly exploitative environments and companies. I just can't imagine, like, I don't know, it just blows my mind that it's happening in Britain because like, you know, if you can buy something made in the UK for $10,
Yeah, you have to
something's gone
question it.
horribly wrong.
well, it is interesting, like how much textiles have been offshored. I was like in the U.S. Even like I think what people would consider probably relatively recently, the 1990, 51% of textile production was done domestically in the U.S., which if you would have asked me, I would have been like probably like 10% in
Yeah,
1990.
it just kind of makes you realize like how recent
Fast it's been.
like the Chinese industrialization has, and it would also be like Bangladesh as well, like a couple others, but it's mostly. I think I was looking at your stats. Was it yours, Hubbard's? Or was it yours? Where it was like the biggest exporters of.
Clothes.
Yeah.
It wasn't mine, but I think the other there's probably a little bit of I see one here where it's Pakistan was number one.
They're the biggest importer.
Oh,
Pakistan's the biggest importer of used clothes, but that's old data. That's 2016.
Yeah,
They were one of the countries that was trying to ban importing used clothes to jumpstart their own domestic textile industry.
I think you'd have a bit of a problem with like discovering exactly where, because it's like anything else in the modern economy where it's like a long supply chain where you might get the fibers from India that's then manufactured into the whatever mid material in, I don't know, Bangladesh, which then is sent on to like Mexico for final production or what. Like there's like seven different countries involved in the supply chain, so it'd be probably hard to like really pinpoint the exact.
Yeah, that's true.
Only one that I saw as like an example of a specific city was in India, and it sounded like in that case that there was quite a bit of vertical integration where everything from making the fabric to dyeing the fabric to making the garments was done in this one city that had over somewhere around 1,000 different businesses devoted to it, because by splitting it up into a bunch of small subcontractors, they could do a similar thing to what happens in China or the UK, where the big clothing brands get a contractor and then that contractor can't actually fulfill the order, so then they get subcontractors, and then these subcontractors are the ones actually doing things, and they'll be like one of 1,000 little companies in this village, and they're all fighting over, who can get the subcontract, so then it drives prices down all the way up the chain. And it also keeps it difficult for the Indian government to regulate pollution and environmental standards because these tiny little companies can hardly afford to do that. And you'll often end up with them skirting the regulations.
Well, even the big ones skirt the regulations. Like one of the ones that I found was so. Well, we can kind of touch on this a bit more, but given that there is kind of a push into being these companies being green, they want to now, like talking about textile companies in general, they want to be seen as green rather than polluters and dealing with climate change and all that wonderful stuff. And one of the things that they're using in order to brand themselves as more green is instead of the polyester, they're using a product called viscose, and it is a synthetic form of fiber made from wood, and the manufacture of it turns out to actually be pretty rough, and one of the biggest suppliers, if not the biggest supplier, is a company in India where I'm trying to find the name of this one. Aditya Birla. It's a big conglomerate company, and they produce this stuff, and they've just been dumping the waste into the rivers, and it turns out to actually be pretty toxic, like above and beyond what like you'd even expect from just throwing waste into the river. And the government is trying to crack down, but given that it's a huge company and it has quite a bit of resources behind it, they've been struggling to do so.
Yeah, it seems like your two options: you either scatter the companies so small that they can't get them all, or you make them so big that they can fight the government.
Yeah, and this one, in the effort to be green, because that's one of the criticisms that I found in the research is the companies that buy the viscose from this Indian conglomerate company, they're all the big labels, and they all put that like, oh, this is organic and all of that type of marketing on their products, which turns out to be just like greenwashing and mostly horseshit.
Honestly, for a lot of those companies, it's like we're trying to help the environment. It's like, okay, then shut down.
Yeah, exactly.
Just close operate. I'm calling your bluff. Like, the only thing that's really going to help the environment for you guys is just shut her down. Call it
the one
day.
Interesting thing that seems to be the trend as of 2023 for these fashion companies is to offer a repair service. So we'll see if that actually works and people use it. But it was Hugo Boss and Tommy Hilfiger planning on being able to repair their clothing. And then there are already Arc'teryx and Patagonia, as well as Uniqlo that I've heard of that have programs in place. And then there are some startup apps, and this is what I find funny because reading The Economist, and they say, they're getting venture capitalist funding, but you know how big of a problem it is when they get 2.2 million in venture capitalist funding for these startup apps to ferry garments between a tailor to fix them and back to the customer. It's like 2.2 million in venture capital funding. That's chump change. That's like, well, take a flyer on this. There's maybe a 1 in 1,000 chance it takes off, probably less.
Yeah, some guy had some leftover funds that he had to spend legally. Yeah. He's like, shit, I have $2.2 million rounding error that I need to get rid of.
So there are some startups that are getting some funding that will work with the customer directly to get their clothes repaired and have the customer just not have to experience any of the difficulties. But we'll see if those take off at all either.
To be fair, I think Patagonia is actually started their repair stuff a long time ago and is like pretty hardcore on it. Like, they actually seem like,
I wouldn't be surprised because they're the brand that is like actually supposed to be a lifestyle brand. Like, I don't think it's just lip service to them, right? Like,
yeah, they seem like actually committed to, as far as I can tell. Like, I don't know, maybe if you dig in deep into the financials, I don't know, but it seems like they're honestly committed, and they've been committed for I think they started theirs in 2012 or before that. Like they've been going for like a long time with this like repair stick as like a revenue source and a like environmental thing, which I think like, especially since like given what Patagonia sells, which is like a lot of like outerwear that's you could, if you repaired it, make it last a lot longer because it's like more heavy duty in the first place. Like kind of makes sense. Like you could probably limp along a coat for a good 10-20 years if you were smart about, you know, keeping it constantly repaired and in good shape.
The one that I first heard about this through was Badlands, which is another sort of outdoor wear company. And it's all made in Vietnam, which is a growing textile manufacturer. It's always had a big industry, but now with sort of the divestment from China, people are really pushing the textiles in Vietnam. And they just basically have an unlimited lifetime warranty, as far as I understand, that if you have a piece of their clothing and it's wrecked and you send it in, they'll repair it, even if you aren't the original purchaser or whatever.
Oh yeah, that also used to be LL Bean until people were abusing it too hard. Like people would literally go to thrift stores and like old garage sales, and they pull out like shredded duck boots from like that have been through 40 years of wear, and they'd be like, "Oh, I need a new pair, please, guys." So I think people suck, and the internet enabled even more suckage behavior.
Speaking of all this like reusing clothing, the weirdest thing I saw, and apparently it's been a thing for a while now, I'm just out of the loop, but they call it, it's not thrifting, but it's something like thrifting. It's what the Zooms do. And they basically go to thrift stores and buy as much stuff as they can that they think is worth something, and then try to resell it on eBay or Kijiji or Craigslist or whatever the Zoomers use.
You're not finding Supreme in those thrift stores, guys.
But it's basically led to inflation in American thrift stores, and I believe Canadian ones, although the Canadian one could just be incidental, because nothing in a thrift store is affordable anymore. And in America, it's now cheaper to buy new clothes than it is to buy from a thrift store, generally speaking.
Just all the Zoomer... This is the entrepreneurial spirit of the Zoomers.
Yeah, a lot of these thrift stores raised their prices because they were making more sales, and they figured they could stomach to make less sales and raise prices. And then all the actual poor people who need secondhand clothing now just have to go buy George at Walmart or Kirkland at Costco or whatever.
It's like a worse path to entrepreneurship than even multi-level marketing.
Yeah, no, I don't know. It bothers me deeply because going to thrift stores is a vibe, and like picking out something that you want to wear at a thrift store is a vibe, and it just ruins it for everybody.
Oh, but you could buy that same item on eBay for the same price, but with $9.99 shipping on top of it.
Yeah.
Some stupid Zoomer.
And then the rest of it's just going to get tossed in the garbage when they can't sell it. So there you go. I doubt they'll return it to the thrift store.
So weird to me.
I'm gonna be honest. I'm gonna put it out there. Who buys shit on eBay? Like, let's be real here. Like that's
eBay. The most recent time was like 3 years ago because I needed a new watch and I remembered eBay existed and that watches don't deteriorate. So I bought one used off eBay for like a quarter of the price.
The only things I've ever bought on eBay were because like some seller had like an eBay store, like some established seller would have an eBay store and they'd sell it for cheaper on their eBay store for some god-awful reason. That's the only thing I've ever bought on eBay, ever in my life.
On Amazon, you have to have a really strict return policy in place, whereas on eBay, you can get away with a lot more shit, so it costs you less fundamentally.
Yeah, probably that's why that they do that, right? They have like a reseller store on their eBay, but like I don't know, I just missed out on eBay. I just don't get the appeal.
Yeah, it's a strange one.
Oh, fuck. I don't know. What's next? Zoomers are gonna start using Craigslist? Like, Jesus.
I think they are. I can imagine.
Yeah, really? They're just recycling all the old websites that should have probably just been left to die.
Yeah, it's true. It's this whole hustle culture of the Zoomers. It's getting bad though because it's starting to bleed up into millennials. It's like hustle culture is making a comeback, and it's like, guys, you aren't 17 anymore.
Yeah, I know. You should have a real job. Do that.
No,
get better at that skill.
But they need some hustle to make that extra couple $1,000 a month, even though the odds are.
Matt, it's YouTube. It's just. I know we're getting a little sidetracked, but it's YouTube. There's all the hustle channels. It's like make $300 a day doing this side hustle. It's like, here's how I made $300 a day doing a side hustle by selling idiots. my class on how to be a
in,
side hustler.
because there is the real side hustle, which is being an influencer, and then you'll get paid a percentage of what everyone buys after you've shown off your haul of Shein. You get a cut of every Shein purchase from the clicking on your link, and
Well,
the make $5,000 off of one Instagram video showing off their Shein.
yeah, that's that Instagram influencer. She's then she has like a whole friggin' house. Like her house was just chock full of shit. And it's like like that video probably took you what? Not even half a day to put together. Like, and you probably even sent it off to an editing team, just filmed it, so it probably took you a few hours at most. Like, and there's $5,000 for that.
Yeah, a couple hours of changing outfits and filming it, and then a couple hours of splicing it all together. And then
Yeah, but it's like most of those people, they just send that shit to their editor. They just have an editor, right?
Oh, it depends. It's hard to move up if you don't do any of the editing in the first place, and then once you're that big, you probably just send it to an editor.
Yeah.
Who wouldn't do that for $5,000? Like, I'd do that. I don't think I'd get $5,000. I'm gonna be honest.
I don't think the male segment of trying on clothing is nearly as big as the female one.
The beat up old jujitsu clothes that have holes in them segment. I don't know how you monetize that, but not a great path for monetization, I don't think.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I kind of mentioned about like fast fashion. I think part of the growing trend now is likely due to that whole influencer culture, right? Where you have the people who are just trying on all sorts of clothing, posting videos of it, and developing like almost like a parasocial relationship with their followers, and the people are like, oh, I want to be exactly like that. Like, you have just tons of those now, which I think like it's more of a personal connection, and so I think it's probably even more effective at selling clothing.
It would be like the direct marketing, I believe it's called, where the person would go to your house, knock on your door, sit down, have a cup of tea or coffee with you, and try to sell you whatever bullshit they're trying to sell you. Because
and you just get it fed to your brain 24/7.
Yeah, but now instead of them having to go into your house, they're just in your Instagram feed.
Yeah.
And like you chose to have them there.
Oh man, that's a good question. Like, which is more cancerous, Instagram influencers or door-to-door salespeople of old direct sales? Because, I want to say Instagram influencers because you can't shoot them. Like, if someone comes to your door,
well, you can, but it just takes a little bit more work figuring out where they live. We're gonna get our podcast taken down over that.
So anyway, I started blasted. Like, that's like you have recourse there. Like, it just
you can at least have the satisfaction of slamming the door.
I think the best part is like they have to have the courage to like come up to your door and like they're physically doing something.
Yeah, exactly. It's like I have some more respect for that.
Filming themselves.
They're hustling. They probably make no money, whereas like these influencers now make $5,000 post.
Man, the mental health problems you could cover up when you're an influencer because you'd never have to leave your home would just be astonishing. It would be like, and zero interaction. Everything's Uber Eats. Drop it on the doorway, like drop the clothes on the doorway.
Yeah, especially if you're actually making good money doing influencing, and then you can afford it all. All right, well, we should probably get back to the topic. Otherwise, we're just going to go on a rant about who's more of a cancer on society. So it would be good for another podcast, but
just
we're professionals here.
I did. You were talking about how a male version probably wouldn't sell very well. This is kind of backed up by the numbers, although it's not as maybe skewed as you'd think. I only found like worldwide numbers, but the female or women's clothes, I guess, was like 53%. Men's was around 30%, and children's was the remainder. I would assume, like, just again, I couldn't really track down more reliable numbers for specific countries. I'd assume like Western countries are probably even more skewed towards women's dominating, just because their women have obviously more money and
more disposable income in general.
Well, I think in like for lack of just in Asian countries, face for men is a big thing in terms of presentation. Like it's way more. I bet you they spend a lot more as a percentage of their income on clothing than Western men.
I was also going to mention that. I was like, on the flip side, I think like a lot of Western like culture for men is like really de-emphasize like dress clothes and suits and stuff, and you get it's like slack in standards a lot, and like people just buy. I think men can get away with just buying a lot less dress clothing, which again for men is probably like the type of clothes they spend the most on, right? Because they're kind of feel obligated to buy like a little more expensive stuff, and the dress clothes are usually priced more expensive than like your more casual clothes. So I would say both of those would make me suspect that Western societies are even more flipped towards women dominating the fashion industry in terms of revenue.
My suspicion, but I didn't find any data to back this up, would be that like many other industries, there'd be maybe 10% of the population that drives 50% of the sales. Like I just feel like that seems intuitive to me, because watching the interviews from journalists trying to cover this sort of on the ground and talk to people about fast fashion, and it just seems like they're coming from like an alien worldview. They'll be like, oh yeah, I wear something once or twice and then it's done. Like, or sometimes I'll buy something and then realize that it's just that it didn't fit me, so, or it didn't suit the theme I was going for, so it's just gone. I never even wore it. And it's like, that is crazy to me. But that's got to be like a minority subset that spends a ridiculous amount on clothing.
Yeah, I'd assume, because like the number I saw was the average American buys 68 items of clothing a year, and I bet you're right. I bet you have like the fashion tuned population. That's a small percentage of the population that's probably, hundreds of items of clothing a year, right? And then you have like your average, like your median is probably lower than your mean, right? You probably have your average person who's buying like maybe 40 or 50 or something like that, and then it's just these outliers that are really pushing the numbers up, because it seems like once you get sucked into the kind of that culture, it becomes your obsession, and you're buying items all the time, and it's just crazy. So, I don't know, 68 seems high for like the median person. Mean, I could see it. Median seems high to me.
I'm definitely dragging things down because I can't see myself buying more than probably 15 things in a year.
Yeah, like 68 for me is definitely much higher. But I don't know, like socks, underwear.
I usually have to buy new socks every couple of years.
That's why you just buy an 80 pack.
Yeah, that's 80 garments right there.
Yeah, exactly.
You hit the mean.
To be fair, I don't know how they count like socks and multi-packs and stuff. I don't know. You have to bust out get the deep dive.
The research paper.
Yeah, get the deep dive on that. I don't know. Like, yeah, what does a Kirkland 10-pack of t-shirts count as? Is that one
that's
garment?
10 for sure.
Is that one garment? I think that just like extends to like another interesting thing about like looking into this topic is just like how bad seem like the baseline research is pretty scarce, but the worst part is like the media journalist reporting on the scarce information is just another level of dog shit. Like there was this one particular number that I think all three of us ran into, which was 10% of CO2 emissions are caused by the textile industry, was like reported, and World Bank had it on their website. Several other like
DW quoted it, which is the German news source.
Yeah, like so it was like quoted in these like Bloomberg had it, like these pretty reputable, supposedly reputable. Although I guess people are.
I think they're not reputable. They have a reputation that's good. It's whether or not they deserve that with this quality of journalism is questionable.
Yeah, so it was in all these different publications, and then when I tried to, 10% to me just seemed high. Like it just struck me as like this is too high. So I tried to like dig down and find the actual base study or whatever that it was based on, because it was like apparently it was from some sort of UN. climate thing that it originally came from. I couldn't ever find a source.
I have an update to this too. So
Well, anyway, I looked at various other sources on just like different sources that estimate CO2 emissions, and like they're definitely less. Like there was this one paper that I found that was on the impact of textile industry on the environment, and it was a pretty comprehensive paper, and they estimated around 2% of CO2 emissions are attributable to the textile industry, and that also jives with a couple other data points that I found. So it's just like I think this 10% got fabricated out of thin air, and then it just got recycled and recycled by all these different outlets, and it doesn't really make any sense. And the other sources on CO2 emissions don't support it whatsoever.
So I was looking for that a bit again, and one of that claim. So let me just find the. So in BBC, they quote that same number: 8 to 10% of global emissions. That's what the fashion industry is responsible for. Then they link to the UN site, and on the UN site that they link to, it directly states the fashion industry is highly greenhouse gas intensive, with estimated emissions ranging from 2 and 8% of global total. So the source that they even provide on the BBC itself is completely wrong. And then I follow that link, 2 and 8%, and this is on the UN's what is this? This is the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. This is their website. And when I try to follow that link, it's just a dead link. Like, it's just some random ass blog that is dead. So
I get all my numbers off random blogs.
Yeah, like it's like fashioncharter.org, and it's like buy this domain. So it's like the UN is quoting random shit that is not even in existence anymore, and then the BBC is directly quoting the UN, and they fucked up they directly make the wrong. They put the wrong numbers. They say between 8 and 10%, and on the website, the UN's website, it says between 2 and 8. So it's just what a travesty.
8, 10. Checkmate, atheist.
Yeah, they're just
between 2 plus 8.
Exactly.
Easy mistake.
You just don't read numbers correctly. Well, I mean, this goes. The Bloomberg article that had that 10% also had stated that the textile industry was responsible for 282 billion tons of CO2 emissions per year, and that sounded high. And so I was like, okay, they have a link to where they found this information. I'm curious where that's from. And then it's like some Chinese research article, but the article clearly states 282 billion kilograms of emissions.
A kilogram, an imperial ton, basically the same thing.
Well, and I was just like, well, clearly it's a Bloomberg writer, so they're American, so they were
they were struggling.
they were started probably having I started twitching and started having conniption when they saw something other than imperial system. So it's understandable, but like, it's just you're off by a factor of 1,000. Like, it's pretty bad reporting to just like run with a number that's just off that badly. And also, apparently, like, this is a person, the journalist is someone who writes in this area, like, once in a while. It's like, shouldn't that like go ding 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 ding? You like presumably reread your article at least once before just YOLO publishing it, I hope. And like, you read 282 billion tons and you're like, yep, sounds right, and just kept going. Like, I just don't know. It's like, do these reporters have any like baseline knowledge that would allow them to critically think about these numbers and just think, oh well, that just doesn't make any goddamn sense? So I don't know, like the reporting on this area is just so bad. Like you have multiple numbers that are seemingly totally inaccurate and couldn't possibly be accurate, and they just get recycled year after year after year, and article after article, and YouTube video after YouTube video. Even another one on some charity ran basically a survey and came to the conclusion that the average person wears a clothing item 7 to 10 times before throwing it out, and that's like quoted in every article, and it's like, no, that's not true. If you go and look at like actual research, again, that I was quoting earlier, the US, it's like 40 times or 45 times before throwing out, and that makes way more sense given how much clothes are bought, how much clothes are worn. Like it 7 to 10 times makes absolutely no sense. It makes no sense.
From like a male perspective, it's like, could you imagine buying more than 10 t-shirts a year? Better not, because that's too high.
Can you imagine buying a t-shirt and wearing it 7 times and then throwing it in the trash? Like,
yeah, like you're gonna wear each t-shirt like a month at least. Like that's just normal.
It's just wild. Yeah. Like, you'd think someone would kind of just think about that. It's like, the average person throws out their clothes after 7 wears. Doesn't that seem weird? And like dig into it a bit more and then realize, oh, okay, no, that's not true. But again, every freaking website and article and quotes the same number, and I don't know, just makes you
like your math on the, what was it, 68 articles of clothing and then times 7, and so you basically have 1 article of clothing per day in the year.
Yeah, that's what I was just like, that's the math I did in my head, because like these same articles will quote the US average number of clothes bought per year, which is 68 articles of clothing. That's all clothing, socks, underwear, t-shirts, pants, footwear is included in there. So it's like, if you're buying 68 items of clothes per year and you're wearing it 7 times, that gives you 1 item per day to wear on average.
Is today a socks day or a shirt day?
Oh no, it's a sneakers day for sure. Just rocking the sneakers, hanging some dong at work. It's gonna be fine.
I think we solved that Liberal MPs, what was going on there.
Exactly. So you just got to keep up with the fast fashion, and apparently the fast fashion is just hanging brain every day. Nobody can afford underwear in their allotted wears per day budget. It's not happening. Sorry, guys. Completely optional. Yeah, I don't know. It's just sad that stuff like that would make it in multiple articles.
Yeah,
like the only stipulation where I think, did you look at the like specific charity, like what they actually did for their study?
They asked people.
Because I was going to say, like, if they specifically asked like dresses or something, like maybe that would be like 6 to 7 times, like something that people don't wear much. But if it's just at general clothes,
but even then, it's like, even if because I didn't find none of them linked to the actual charity's quote unquote study. So maybe you're right. But then then Bloomberg shouldn't be running with that number as like the number of times the average person wears the average item of clothing. You know what I mean? Like,
well, it's one of those things where everyone thinks they're somehow exceptional, and they're sitting there in their shirt that they've worn 53 times, and they're like, man, I just can't believe the rest of the world is all throwing these perfectly good shirts out after 7 uses.
Yeah, like the writer's like, oh man, I'm like literally a fucking hero, the biggest environmentalist of all time. I wore my socks 14 times. Like, I'm saving the planet. Like the average person would have thrown these out weeks ago.
Like, what's more likely? You're a crazy exception to the rule, or that the rule that you're reading is incorrect?
Or the third option, you're a complete fucking retard. For Bloomberg journalists, it apparently seems to be always the most likely option. Like, it's unbelievable how bad it is, like, reporting on this.
It's tough times.
Oh,
and you wonder why people are worried about ChatGPT taking jobs. It's like, we thought AI hallucinations were bad, but then you realize humans hallucinate all the time.
The journalist hallucinations.
Oh, like, yeah, ChatGPT could not possibly pump out something worse than these articles. Like, it's not possible.
Just wait till it can
I,
do video. Like you got the video link up for AI as well, and then you don't even need the shitty YouTube channels that
And
quote
you
all
don't
the
even need to interview
same
real
idiotic
people
numbers.
anymore.
You won't need us.
AI generated me a Ukrainian refugee to tell me his opinions on the war.
yeah, what would the average Ukrainian, what would the AI generated Ukrainian say about the war?
AI generate me an oppressed textile worker to tell me their conditions they face.
Yeah, truly the future. Well, it was so funny too because I found like a interesting blog where this guy cataloged every single piece of clothing that he owns and wore every day, and like all the prices and stuff, so he could like calculate like the cost per wear and like the number of times he wears every different category of clothing and stuff. Like it was like actually really well done and had some pretty interesting insights. And it's just like some random guy writing a blog and was 10 times more effort and 10 times more informative than any of the big, you know, quote unquote respected journalists mustered up. And like, yeah, I don't know, it's pretty interesting.
Well, he's actually presumably doing it for his own knowledge and self improvement or betterment, whereas the journalists are just pumping out an article.
Yeah, and
You would not catch me writing down what I wore every day, but I mean, if somebody sold a system with little RFID chips and you just tab them to your clothes, and when you walk out of your room, it says you wore that day, it would be interesting data to have.
oh, for sure, and that's definitely the future is like data and all that stuff. Especially like, I mean, clothing is one, but like food and all that stuff. Oh, it's gonna be dreamy.
Yeah, when you
Something
take it to the pantry, it tells you, or logs it.
Autistically obsess over numbers about everything. Yes, the flood of data coming, personalized data coming is pretty awesome. And clothes, yeah, would be a great one to use it on. Like, because I think having the data would really like inform people about what clothes they actually get value out of. Like, I think a lot of people make purchase decisions that are not congruent with what they actually wear day to day.
I'm going to say I'm here representing the guys who have as many T-shirts as they can wear, and then they do all of them in the wash when they're all dirty, and then just repeat the cycle.
True, but I guess like...
But yeah, like most people don't do that. So like that.
Someone buys like a $300 coat and then they wear it 3 times a year. You know what I mean? And then they buy a $30 coat and wear it 100 times a year.
Oh, I have such a good $20 coat that I've probably worn 500 times. Best purchase of my life. So good.
Yeah, I think like that'll be like interesting to have. I think it could help with the fast fashion problem too, because I think a lot of the purchasing decisions that people make it's the purchase themselves that they're chasing, right? Not the actual like for the fast fashion stuff. It's like, oh yeah, it's like a quick dopamine hit because you bought something and then you wear it once or.
Well, we were I think we were discussing that before we started the podcast, but there was some interviews with brain scientists, and they were studying sort of the dopamine receptors and how they trigger and such. And I was found it a little over the top to say that it generalized to all consumers, but they're absolutely honing in on those people who get that hit out of buying new things, which I have no idea what percentage of the consumers that those are, and then figuring out how to make that hit better and faster and more instantaneous, the reward that you get from it.
Yeah, I don't know the full solution to like getting people to not just repeatedly buy shit because they're addicted to buying shit. But I think it would help just like show people like, hey, all that stuff that you bought, like you didn't wear and you didn't actually enjoy, and here's the things you actually do enjoy wearing, and here's the stuff you could actually focus on.
RFID chips that you can't spoof, that track how many times you've worn the shirt and then display it somehow, and then you're just flexing that you've worn this shirt 365 times. potential future.
Won't be
Yeah.
popular with the or the Gen Z though. One of the things that I found was Gen Z, despite being the most like concerned with the environmental impacts of fast fashion, are the biggest users of it.
I mean, you have to find a way to make. What I'm saying is basically, if they found a way to make slow fashion cool, like a way to display or like gamify re-wearing the same
Yeah.
garment.
But yeah,
Yeah.
that might that definitely would help with
this.
a like a certain segment of the population who might like be unconsciously kind of just over purchasing, don't really realize it, or don't think that they're doing too much.
Honestly, I think the next decade will belong to the
Or do you
like
have five chip?
the autistic people that enjoy gamifying everything. Be the only productive people left.
Yeah, that's true. Just not on TikTok, or at the very
Everyone
least,
will
they're just
be-
showing their stats on TikTok, and that's it.
It'll be like finally being able to like make ADHD productive. Just like having everything be gamified and super short-term rewards and stuff that actually work.
Yeah, instant feedback.
Again, yeah, clothing may not be the number one, but I could see it. Do we have any other concerns, issues that we want to cover on?
I think the one we didn't quite touch on is a classic. Or did we touch on it? I don't think we touched on it deeply, but basically just the pollution from the river and groundwater that's caused by this textile manufacturing in third world countries with poor environmental standards. And the big problem that causes in the entire surrounding area, everywhere downstream of the factories, it reduces and sometimes completely shuts down agricultural production. So that 1 pound in India that I was talking about, where they've got it sort of vertically integrated to all produce textiles, and they've got a big pollution problem there. One of the farmers interviewed used to have livestock, and then he can't have livestock because the grazing land's not good enough anymore, and he can't grow any crops because it doesn't grow well enough anymore. And his coconut trees have reduced their yield 30% in the last 20 years. So he now has to import coconuts from other areas of India to put through his coconut processing plant and sell like coconut oil and coconut husk. So it's actively damaging the ability of other industries, specifically agriculture, to thrive. Not to mention the human cost with things that are carcinogenic, or for instance, making that wood fiber, it causes heart attacks and paralysis.
Yeah,
So
there's been a lot of
effects from the pollution.
yeah, with that Indian plant, there's been like a lot of kids who have become disabled.
Yeah, so there's a big human cost to the pollution as well as
Yeah, it's not just like climate
wildlife
change concerns. Like I think the much more
agriculture.
important and immediate concern should be like the pollution that's directly like just
Well,
poisoning people and crops right away.
I saw a funny video that was like doing relative comparisons of CO2 emissions, and a paper straw was like 1.1 grams CO2. Plastic straw was like 1.2 grams, and then a reusable canvas bag was 2.5 kilos of CO2.
That's one of the things that gets me. It's just like,
And
man,
it's
like by banning plastic bags, you're actually creating so much more fucking CO2. I do think like getting rid of
If you use that
the
plastic bag 1,000, or that reusable bag 1,000 times, it breaks even.
well, sorry, plastic bag, because I was talking about straws. Plastic bags, I think, are 20 grams, so you only have to use it 125 times.
Oh, that's better than the numbers I had heard. So it's not even that bad.
So
I guess that's a canvas bag, though. Most of the reusable bags I use are plastic. So.
those are even better. Those are only like a few hundred grams.
Oh,
like
nice.
the-
That's
so
actually
you
good
only-
to know because those ones seem to be the most common. Maybe that's why.
You only have those ones. I think I'd have to double check the video. It's only like a few dozen times to repay those ones. To be honest, like that seems high. Like there's no way. I probably buy, or I don't buy anymore. I borrow reusable bags like every second trip. So definitely a
Yeah.
net negative for me in terms of environmental impact. But like,
Well,
I guess
that's
the
actually what
moral
a
of the
lot of
story.
people do. It's like the amount of times I'm at the store and I see people purchasing the reusable bags. It's like I bet you the average person actually probably has quite the collection of reusable bags that are eventually just all going to wind up in the garbage.
I can say
Yeah,
with a fair amount of certainty that in my small town where everyone's, what's the polite word? Thrifty, that you see almost everyone has the reusable bags and using them because they can't be asked to spend 25 cents
well, here's the
on
trick.
cardboard bags or like a buck on a new bag.
The number of bags that I've purchased, if I had $1 for every bag I purchased, I'd have no money. That's the real like inflation saver.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's just crazy that you say zero point 0.1 of a gram of CO2 emissions, paper versus plastic, and then it's like people are just buying like 68 items of clothes on average. Seems like, if Karen could trim down one t-shirt a year, like I could go back to plastic straws. But
God
yeah,
damn it.
tough life here. Yeah, I don't know. I just feel like clothes definitely seems like something that people should bitch about more. Like the environmental activists should bitch about a lot more because it's such a
It's an
brain
easy
dead.
solution.
It's such an easy thing to cut down on. It's like you really don't need to buy 68 items. You don't need to buy 58 items. You can probably get away with 20 items a year, no problem. And it's such a tiny sacrifice. And then it's like, oh, instead of doing that, we're gonna ban meat or like all these much more lifestyle intensive changes that are really asking people to make core
That's
fundamental changes. And then it's like, oh, but no, we can't give up like our clothing. Like it's like, I
it's
don't know.
almost like it's easier to make absurd demands that nobody will follow than to actually try and make them do things that they could be able to do.
So I'm gonna continue to save the environment and just not buy very many clothes. That's my decision.
Man, the worst thing about this is I definitely need to buy new clothes, but after reading this, I don't want to. These people that buy all the new clothes all the time seem just creepy to me.
Oh, we got anything else?
No,
I think that about sums her up.
that's good for me. All right. Thanks for listening.